guys started this series the past few weeks. We've been going through a series about dating done right. And I must say that I am very impressed by the fact that we even have such a series. At the time when I was getting married, I remember there were some topics about dating, and pretty much the topics were, no, you cannot date. And then I remember even in my personal situation where we were told, Susie and I, that we should get engaged and then we can date. And we didn't do a full engagement, we did a lips dip, but it's still a formal thing. So we've come a long way. So the fact that you guys have a series on dating, I think that says a lot. But then as we get into dating, one of the issues that we'll talk about today is there are a lot of temptations and a lot of things that happen, and how far can we go? Especially on the physical side, it's very difficult to be engaged, especially if it's a long engagement. If it's a short engagement, it's not that bad. But if Susie and I, we were engaged for 3 years. So if you're dating for 3 years before marriage, it could be difficult to stay not physical. And so the question becomes, how do you deal with that? What do you do, and how do you overcome it? And do you really have to? And there are three areas we really want to explore. One is, what does the Bible say? Because a lot of times we're like, well, Yanni, you're really getting too picky. The Bible doesn't really say that. Or sometimes it's a cultural thing, and it's like, well, that's just a Middle Eastern view, but you really can date and can have premarital sex, and you can do all sorts of things. And Yani, why are we being so picky? That's a cultural thing. That's not really an important aspect. I don't have to adhere to the culture. And we'll also explore it from a psychological point of view. I can tell you as a matter of fact from studies that have been done within the field of psychology, couples that have had premarital sex have a higher chance of divorce than couples that do not. Again, I'm saying within psychology, it has nothing to do with religion. Couples that have had premarital sex have a higher percentage of divorce than those that did not have. Statistically, yes. So it's not just the Bible says, but it's almost like the beautiful thing is, as we study the Bible, we find out that the Bible really leads us to a better psychological state and so forth. So there's an interrelationship, and that's why I have that thing up there about, is God a killjoy? Because sometimes we feel that, it's like, I want to have fun, these are my years, and God is just ruining it for me. And so, but in fact, He's actually building it for me, so I can have a happy marriage, not so that I would go out and ruin it. So we'll read from Thessalonians this passage, and I have different colors, and we'll talk about all the different colors in a more expanded way, but we'll just go through it quickly. It is God's will that you should be sanctified, that you should avoid sexual immorality, that each of you should learn to control his own body in a way that is holy and honorable, not in passionate lust like the heathen, who do not know God, and that in this matter no one should wrong his brother or take advantage of him or her, of course. The Lord will punish men for all such sins, as we have already told you and warned you. For God did not call us to be impure, but to live a holy life. Therefore, he who rejects this instruction does not reject man, but God, who gives you his Holy Spirit. Okay, let's start dissecting that a little bit. You'll notice there are a few things here. I don't know if you can see well, but better? You'll notice there are a few things here that we want to focus on. Control his body, holy and honorable. Also passionate lust. and so on. So we want to just go through some of these, the whole idea of rejects God or rejects his instruction. So we'll go through some of these. First, holy and honorable. The word holy itself means put aside or set aside, means pure. So when we talk about anything, when we talk about this is a holy table, that means this table is pure and it's set aside. It's set aside for a purpose. So when we talk about the church is holy, when we talk about anything that's holy, it's set aside for a purpose. It's not just that it's pure, but it also has a specific purpose for use. Honor is something of value, and if you look at the original word in Greek, it really means precious, of high value, of dignity, of high esteem, etc. So if we just read that God wants us to control our bodies in a way that is holy and honorable, in a way that's holy and honorable, in a way that's set aside, that's pure, and that is of high esteem, of dignity, that makes it precious. That means sex is holy. And I know some people get really confused with that phrase, but sex is holy. It's not something that God made and said, oops, I shouldn't have made that. God made sex, and he made it, and it's holy. It's not dirty, as sometimes we grow up to think sex is dirty. Sex is holy, but it has its place. And one of the problems that sometimes we face is that when I grow up thinking sex is dirty, sex is dirty, sex is dirty, sometimes people, when they do get married, they have a problem sexually because they are thinking sex is dirty, sex is dirty, sex is dirty. Sex is not dirty. Sex is holy. However, God intended for that holy thing called sex to be practiced in a certain way. Why? Because there are a lot of ramifications to it, as we'll talk about. And like I said, including even psychologically, there's a lot of damage that takes place when we do practice it outside of marriage. So sex is holy. It's set apart for a purpose. It is something that is pure. It is something that's of great value. It is something that is of high esteem. So it's something that is holy, that is set aside, that is of high esteem and dignity. It's also the highest form of expression that one person can give to another. So it's not something that we give lightly, or we should not give lightly, but it's something that has to be given because in a way that shows that it's the utmost, highest form of that I can give to another person. Think of it this way. If I'm going around and everybody I see, I tell them, I love you, I love you, I love you. The next person that comes along and I tell them I love you, does it mean much? Definitely not. On the other hand, imagine somebody who it takes so much to get that word out of them. You know, you've been seeing that person for such a long time and they still haven't said anything. And then finally, one day they tell you on Valentine's Day or whatever, they say, I love you. It means a lot more, right? Doesn't it? And so the same thing over here, we find that when something is given away so cheaply, so freely, it doesn't really mean much. It's a cheap thing. People give it out all the time. But sex is not supposed to be that way because of the high esteem that God gives it. It should be something that we only give it in an appropriate way. So therefore, it's the highest form, and it's also of the highest value. That's why, for example, in terms of the trauma, you can get somebody, if somebody's mugged, somebody's held to a gunpoint, somebody's held, all sorts of things like that, and guys, unfortunately, might not experience this, but one of the most difficult traumas a person can go through is rape. More than a mugging, more than all these things. Because that is something that is so valuable to the person that's taken away. And so because of that, it's something of the highest form, it's something of the highest value that I possess as a person in a relational, from a relational point of view. That for me to, in a relationship, offer it to somebody else, it's of the highest value. Therefore, I have to guard it and give it sparingly. I cannot just give it out like that. So again, it's holy, meaning it's set apart for a purpose. And that purpose is that I will give it to a person that is willing to give me a whole life commitment. Their entire life they're giving me. And therefore it needs to be esteemed. Somebody who gives you their entire life, that's the person that you're willing to offer this as, again, the highest value or highest form that you can give. In both a physical and spiritual sense, it is all you can give. It's, like I said, it's the maximum you can give. It's all you can give. So for me to give it just like that, I reduce the value of it. It's not of any value anymore because I just give it freely. But because it's the most precious thing that I have, it's something that I will only give in a very meaningful way.
Sure. Some of our brothers and sisters have just made mistakes in the past. I mean, physically, much more spiritually. What would you like? What words do you have for us in those situations?
Let's hold off that thought for a moment and let's get back to it later, because here's the thing. A lot of what I will be talking about is how to preserve myself from damage. And then the question is, okay, what if some damage has happened? Now, does that mean I cannot have a happy marriage? I still can. The short answer is I still can, but it's kind of like, think of somebody who has high metabolism and somebody who doesn't. Somebody, they eat everything and they're still healthy and in shape and everything. Somebody else, they look at food and they gain 5 pounds. The person who looks at food and gains 5 pounds can still be healthy and can still enjoy a healthy and athletic life and everything. It's just that it's not as easy. So the same thing, the answer to your question is, it will take some work, but I can still enjoy life and I can still enjoy my marriage and everything. It's just that it will need a little bit more work because it's not going to be as automatic as it would otherwise. Okay? So everything we say, even if, I had relations and I have not been preserving myself, etc., does that mean I'm doomed? No, I'm not doomed. That's where we have the process of forgiveness, and again, I'll get into that a little bit later. But this is the ideal situation, and we'll talk about what if I haven't met that. What can I do to deal with it? Okay. So again, it should not be given away lightly, but it should be given to the person that I will marry. So my body would belong to that person, and that person would belong to me. It's something that we do as a mutual thing. It's important that we make sure we do not throw it away. If I am going out with somebody, and we have been talking, and I can't tell you how many times I've dealt with people who are talking about we're getting married, 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 and then something happens and they do not get married. And I will never forget when I was in college, there was one person, she was a virgin and she was preserving her virginity for her marriage, and she was not Egyptian, she was actually Indian. And at that time, believe it or not, St. John's had only 2 Egyptians. Myself and another guy who was a Muslim who was there as well. And he was going out with her, and he convinced her that he was going to marry her, and everybody knew that those 2 are getting married. So she opened up like, basically they're getting married. What's the big deal before? After, it's no big deal. And so she gave her body to him, and about a week later, they broke up. And she was devastated because she said, again, I'm not as familiar about the Indian culture, but from what I understood, she said pretty much she cannot get married anymore in the culture, so it sounds like it's a similar culture, but she cannot get married, and she was devastated. Everything assured her that they will get married, but they did not get married. So until, as the saying goes, until the fat lady sings, until I do actually get married, until I am in church and I get married to that person, anything could happen that prevents the marriage. You never know. Many people, until the day of the wedding, there's a chance, and at the time of the wedding, they have a fight and they never go through the wedding. It happens a lot. Just because I'm sure does not mean I will get married. Things happen. And part of it is the commitment that people have, and we'll talk about that because this is also a sign. Okay. In First Thessalonians, it says, each of you should learn to control his own body, as we just read, one of the highlighted parts of the verse. That self-control in and of itself is a character that we should be looking for in our future spouse. So if my future spouse does not show any signs of self-control, that means they do not show signs of maturity. One of the signs of maturity is self-control. A child, when they want something, they will run and get it. It doesn't matter what the consequences is, and one of the things that we try to train our children is that they start thinking about the consequences. But normally, naturally to them, they don't really care. They run to whatever they want, and they really don't care. So as a sign of maturity that we always look for is that the person has self-control. And unfortunately, sometimes we see adults and grown-ups, they don't have the self-control. So it's not just children and grown-ups, but it's a sign of maturity. I can be an adult and not mature, and I can be a young person and I can still be mature. But as a sign of maturity, you want the person to have self-control. If my future spouse is not displaying self-control, that means they do lack signs of maturity. And it's something to be concerned about. Because the idea is that when I go through school, for example, we go through 4 years of college or 5 years of college, or some of you go for post-college degrees and graduate degrees and postgraduate and so forth. There's the concept of delayed gratification. When you measure somebody's maturity, you look for, are they someone who wants the gratification right away, or are they willing to put in an effort and have their gratification later? So I might, for example, wind up having to work hard, and I'm miserable, I'm not happy, I'm doing whatever I can to finish whatever I'm doing, but on the basis that later on, I will be able to get a degree and perhaps enjoy myself. Or I'm going to be able to get a vacation, or I'm going to be able to get something. And so we all have lived and have, to some extent, I hope, have dealt with delayed gratification. And yet, even though I can do something now, or I can do something later and get gratification, a lot of times we wait until later so we can get the gratification. And so that idea of delayed gratification is a sign of, and which is also a sign of self-control, is a sign of maturity. So you want to make sure that the person is willing to wait until you're married. If one of the two of you, if one of you is pushing the other person to have a physical relation at that time, what you're really doing is you are showing lack of maturity. And then this has consequences, because the next thing is, what else is in our life are we going to, when people cheat within the marriage, when people cheat on each other, guess what the reason is? Lack of self-control. Lack of the ability to have delayed gratification. It's what you think is a good thing now. Be careful, because it might seem like a good thing, but that very thing is a sign in the person of a problem that could take place later on. So if my future spouse is not willing to wait, that might be a sign that maybe when we get married, that person might not be able to control themselves when they're in the presence of somebody else, or when they have a temptation as a married person. Passionate lust. One of the most confusing areas is the difference between love and lust. Unfortunately, Hollywood portrays this image of love that is really lust. In every aspect, it is lust. And yet they portray it as love. And the amazing thing is, if you look at marriages, and this is just and it's something I think you all know already, you don't need to do a dissertation for it. But if you look at the statistics of the divorce among those in Hollywood who are sending us the message, who are giving us the message that that we should have a love life that is in a promiscuous way, it really shows you what the consequences are. Because you look at that and you look at their life and the statistics of divorce rates among them versus among the rest of the population. And it's a big, big difference because there's the confusion between lust and love. A healthy person has to be integrated. Integrated meaning mind, body, and soul, they all worked in tandem together. And so for all of them to work in tandem together, part of it is my relationship with my future spouse. That relationship itself involves my mind, involves my passions, involves my emotions, involves my spirituality, involves everything. And if I don't have all of them together, integrated, then I will not be a whole person. And so what happens is, if they're not working together and I give the person my physical 100%, my body 100%, yet I'm still, because we're not married, we still haven't given each other everything else 100%. We're still holding back. What happens? I'm no longer integrated. And there are consequences to that. And as a matter of fact, one of the interesting things is when people use sex in a lustful way, I can tell you, even after marriage, sex turns into lust and not love. And then when they have a fight, how do they fix the fight? Sex. Exactly, make-up sex. And notice I use the term sex, not love, because it's lust. And that's how, and actually, interestingly, you'll find people who say, oh, we had great sex. But did they have love? No, it was lust.
Yeah, pardon me, I just don't know what you meant by integrated where.
Okay, as a person, I need to be integrated physically, emotionally, and mentally.
To what?
Right? All three are integrated together. In other words, my emotional side cannot be in one direction, and if my mental is in one area, my emotion is another area, my body in a third area, I'm not integrated. So everything has to work together. And if I am doing something emotionally that does not integrate with my mind or does not integrate with my body, then I'm not integrated.
But how practical do they all work together, regularly?
That's the level of maturity. The more mature I am, the more I'm able to integrate all together. And that's...
You're not always... I don't think you're always fully able to do all three at once, because some people are more emotional, some people are more logical. So I don't think you're ever evenly balanced out.
When you're more emotional, more intellectual, or these are the forces that are pushing you, but still all have to come together. So you might be more emotional. That means your emotions might drive you, but your body and your intellect will have to sync with your emotions. If not, then what happens, you get to your intellect because you say, oh, I'm really so emotional now, I can't deal with this, I have to take a break or whatever. And so all of a sudden, now you're trying to control that emotion that kind of went too far. That's a sign of an integrated person. But when you let your emotion go too far and you start separating your emotions from your intellect, from your body, from your spirituality, then all of a sudden you're not integrated anymore. That's why even within psychology, one of the things that they look into is when you do therapy, you're not just doing it emotionally or not intellectually, but it's in total. There's a lot of research about doing therapy spiritually, doing therapy and in every aspect. And a lot of exercises people will do in therapy are physical, because I have to have my physical, my intellect, my emotions, and my everything together.
Sorry. So you kind of defined 3 distinct categories that kind of make up a person while we're talking about this.
Yeah.
And so I guess the point of a lot of this is to kind of understand boundaries. And so you talk about one extreme. You're gonna maybe talk later about the other extreme. Like, are we asked to set a line, not just physically but emotionally and I guess intellectually, logically, mentally?
The whole series actually has been dealing with the different areas. I mean, today I'm focusing on the physical, but the whole series has been addressing the different areas, because we are, again, as a person, I'm all the above. So I need to address all of them. And one of the areas that we tend to have difficulty with is the physical. So today I'm just focusing on the physical, but yes, the series is focusing on all of them combined.
I guess what I'm asking is, are we asked to draw a line in all of those categories? Are we asked
Absolutely. My boundaries, I need my boundaries everywhere. I cannot give, say, even forget the physical. I cannot give someone everything that I'm still going out with that we have not been married yet. I cannot give all my emotions, because again, going back to what I said, if we do not get married, which there's a lot of plus, I mean, it's not an impossible thing to imagine. I would have given all my emotions, and it will be devastating. It will be something a lot of people do not even recover from very well. So I still have to be reserved. I still have to be cautious. There are things that we still, even at an emotional level, at an intellectual level, in every way, we have to still be careful before we give everything to the other person. So no, it's not just physical, you're right, but it's also the other things. But it's the physical that really becomes a temptation. It's easy for me to hold back on other things. But the physical, there's always that temptation for it.
Could I just interject a thought
Please.
also? I think, we assume before marriage there's this boundary, and then after marriage the boundary is gone, and like now you're going to be completely intimate physically, spiritually, intellectually, everything. And I think the reality is that after marriage we have the opportunity to now be intimate, and have real communion in all those areas, but it's not like a foregone conclusion.
Absolutely. We work on it. Actually, it's a lifetime journey that we work on. And I can tell you, after 22 years of marriage, we're still working on that. So it's something, and we'll be working on it come 20 years later. If I'm still alive, I'll tell you I'm still working on it. So it's not something that it just happens and you wonder, like, wait a minute, it didn't happen. What's wrong with my marriage? It's something that we work on, and part of the problem is when people just assume love happens. And therefore, if love happens and it's a reaction, therefore, I can't tell you how many people come and they say, we fell in love, we got married, and now I've fallen out of love. I'm working with several couples that there's nothing specifically wrong with the couple. It's not like they had a fight. It's not like they... One guy, he tells me, she's wonderful, I have nothing against her, but I don't love her anymore. There are certain things that they have not worked on prior to, at the time that they got married, and they just used, again, the Hollywood, which is, it's a reaction. No, it's not a reaction, it's something that we work on. And we can all relate to a car. A car will drive beautifully for a while, but unless I do maintenance, it will break down and stop working. But if I keep maintaining the car, it will last a long time and it will drive perfectly. Okay, so my sexual life is connected to my relationships, it's connected to love, it's connected to commitment. And commitment is a very big thing that a lot of times we're not committed, or we think we're committed but we're not really sure, and that comes into play with the whole issue of lust. And so there's a difference between I'm giving myself in love or I'm giving myself to someone who is a luster, someone whose lusts after me, or I lust after that person. We have to be careful whether it's lust or love. Love by nature is agape love. And we all know the difference between eros, philia, and agape. Agape is where I'm giving to the other person that I love. A sign of loving is giving to that person, which is different than eros. Eros is when I love somebody, I love that person because I enjoy, there's something that I get out of it, not that I'm giving. And that's eros, from where we get erotic love. And so erotic love, I'm the one who benefits from the erotic love, not the person I'm loving. That's why someone can erotically love a picture, love a person that they never met. It doesn't matter because it's dependent on their own benefit, not on benefiting the other person. That is lust. And what happens is, even with a person that I'm with, sometimes it's not clear whether I'm in love with that person or I'm lusting with that person. If I'm in love with that person, I want to do what's best for that person. If that means I wait until the wedding, then I will wait until the wedding. If I don't love that person, then I don't really care about waiting. Why wait? Let's just do it now. And unfortunately, those lusters, it's usually a sign of a condition that they have prior to meeting that person. A lot of times, people who tend to have a lot of sexual activity before marriage, a lot of times, if you look at the bottom line, why that is happening, if they're having a lot of sex and dating, it's because of insecurities that they have prior to the marriage. And what happens is, if that person is insecure, they will bring it to the marriage. Many times, you will find that they will use sex in order to hide that insecurity, because that's the only way that I feel attractive, or that I feel needed, or that I feel wanted. And as the saying goes, men seek love to get sex. Women seek sex to get love. Think about it again. Men seek sex to get love. Men seek love to get sex. Women seek sex to get love. A lot of times, when something I don't have, if I don't have love, if I haven't been loved, if I have issues from childhood of feeling insecure or whatever, a lot of times I have that desire to be attractive, and therefore I want people to want me sexually. One of the most difficult personality disorders to deal with is called the borderline personality disorder. One of the signs of it is the person who is very promiscuous, who is literally, he or she, it's more common among females, but it happens to males too. Typically, the person is pretty much every opportunity they will try to sleep with whoever, simply because it makes them feel attractive, it makes them feel wanted, it makes them feel good. Because the fact is, they had so many, typically this disorder comes out of a childhood of neglect and other things, and as a result, this makes me feel better when I have been neglected and feel insecure throughout all my childhood and a good part of my life. So therefore, a lot of times when somebody is eager, if my future spouse is eager to break that boundary and is eager to to get physical, the first question that comes to my mind is, why is that? Why is that person seeking that? Is it because of some insecurity that they have that they're going to bring into the marriage? Because the fact is, a lot of times we think, oh, once they get married, they'll get fixed. No, people don't get fixed when they get married. And if anything, your insecurities will come out even more. If you haven't worked them out before marriage, they'll come out even more during the marriage. And a lot of times, I work with couples where the issues that we're dealing with have nothing to do with the two of them. It has to do with their own issues from prior to the marriage. So if my future spouse seems eager to get physical, it just begs the question, why is that person eager to get physical? Is it because of some insecurity?
Can you clarify eager? You mean like someone wants to get physical, but they're trying to control themselves, or they're pushing the back.
No, push. I'm sorry. Yes,
Yeah,
everyone.
because I think there's a
Yeah, no,
fine
there's-
line there.
there's
We gotta
someone who's
recognize
pushing.
that men and women are wired to desire each other.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, I'm talking about the person who's pushing. If my future spouse is pushing me because they want me to get physical, that's different than. Don't get me wrong. I hope that if a couple is dating, that they are attracted to each other. Otherwise, there is a problem. Okay, so I'm not presuming that they should not have the desires. If they do not have the desires, seriously, they should seek help because there is a problem in the relationship. So they should have the desires. The issue is not about that they shouldn't have the desire. The issue is what do I do with the desire? And that's where the self-control that we talked about comes in. That's where the maturity of delayed gratification comes in. So, but if I can't deal with that and I can't wait because I need to push the other person to get physical right away, that questions whether it's because of self, and again, we're putting several things out there. I don't know which one it is. It might be that I lack self-control, or it might be like we were just saying, that there are issues from my background that I'm bringing into the relationship.
So we're talking about getting physical and that, getting hurt. But what exactly is the line? Like, are we talking about just having sex or like everything that comes before sex
Actually,
also?
I like this question. We didn't start with that.
Yeah,
Because
I like that
there's-
question too.
Besides.
I like that question too. We're all mature adults here.
It's a great question. No, actually, actually, my plan was at the end I had a couple of questions just in case people didn't ask them. That was one of them.
Let's get to the meat, man.
So-
We got 15 minutes to go. So, get to it. Just saying.
If we assume that I do not want to get physical for a lot of reasons, and maybe I'll just since we are no longer going by the let me mention a couple of things first, and then that are not even on the slides, but I think it's important to mention. Little certain types of birds, the little chicks when they're born, there's an imprint that happens to them when they do. The first thing that they see when they come out is mommy, right? And we all see that in cartoons. We see it elsewhere, but certain species, when they do come out, whatever they see in front of them is mommy. So the first thing that I see keeps an imprint in my head. Same thing with our sexual relations, and especially for guys even more than women. My very first experience has an imprint that will stay with me, and that's where we were saying. So if I have an experience and I already have an imprint, I will need to work harder at dealing with that imprint. Not that I cannot enjoy sex afterwards, but what happens is my first experience, my initial experience, will make a difference in how I perceive sex and how it's associated. For example, let me just give you a very clear example. If somebody was raped, and that was their first sexual experience, or any kind of inappropriate sexual experience, you get that person to marry and be in a relationship, and no matter what you do, that will be very traumatic for them. And rape victims inside the marriage have a very hard time, and they need a lot of therapy in order for them to be able to enjoy a sexual relationship. Why? Because my very first relationship has a great impact on how I see it. Now,
Sorry, is it just your first or any previous relationship?
it's the whole chunk at the beginning of my life
Okay.
that impacts how I perceive my relationship, my sexual relationships. That's why there are many men and women in their marriage that they have a hard time sexually and they don't enjoy sex. Why? Because they've experienced sexual relationship outside of the marriage prior to getting married, and that had an imprint. So now that I dated several people and I slept with several people, I come into my marriage and now I have a certain imprint in my head that I'm looking for, and it doesn't happen. And so what do people do? They start resorting to pornography and other things as well. And the saddest thing is a lot of people cannot get their satisfaction in their marriage, and so they resort to either extramarital or they resort to just fantasy, which is pornography. And all this has to do with if I do not have the self-control to control my initial experiences in sex, then everything falls apart later on. Again, it doesn't mean that it's forever. I can still work on it, but it becomes a lot harder. It becomes like the person who has low metabolism who wants to be healthy. Can they be healthy? Absolutely. But they'll need to work harder at it. And so what happens is that first imprint that I have in my initial or few experiences of sex impacts me. So if my first one has to do with guilt, with feeling, with having a relationship that was not proper, with even if I wind up marrying her anyway, or marrying him anyway, sorry.
You know, the Armenian bomb that just came out was asking not just about sex, but what's the, and maybe you're
Yes,
going
I'm getting into
All
where
right.
do we draw the line. But I wanted to lead
You wanted to set the
first,
stage
first, why is it even of significance to begin
Gotcha.
with? So,
Okay.
and so the beautiful thing that I really found is when you start reading the Bible and not just taking it like, okay, that's just the closed-minded people who are into religion, but it's a guide because you find out all psychology research afterwards supports why we do what we do, why the Bible tells us to do what we do. So if by having premarital sex, I am creating those imprints that will affect my sexual relationship after marriage. If I want to have a happy marriage with happy sex in the marriage, I have to be careful about what I do before marriage. Because what happens is whatever I do before marriage impacts the marriage. And again, we always see this on television, elsewhere, the whole idea of they get married, they don't have sex anymore. They only have sex before marriage, but once they get married, they don't have sex. Why? Actually, that is true, but why? Because they had it before marriage. They messed up that imprint, and so now that they get into marriage, they have a hard time. Because if I'm used to being aroused in a certain way, I'm used to be fulfilled in a certain way, once I get married and that way changes now because I'm married, I cannot be fulfilled anymore. And that becomes a very significant issue among married couples.
Can I just ask, is it because before marriage there's an excitement because there's an uncommittedness? Because I always wondered, like, why is it that people they'll even cohabitate for years, and there's something that it's like uncommitted, but once now that there's this official commitment, you're saying there's a change.
It's that.
So their sexual relationship will even change.
Yes, it's interesting that you said that, Abuna, because even I remember, and there's actually someone that I'm seeing now. He's he's married and he's in an improper relationship that we're working on getting him off of that relationship. And one of the things about that relationship is not that it's not really the person as much as there's an adrenaline rush of the excitement about having the extramarital affair. And sometimes before marriage, it's almost like you lust after, a piece of chocolate, and once, you see me eating a piece of chocolate, and you lust after one piece, and then once I give you a whole stack of bars of chocolate, it's like it doesn't matter to you anymore. It's just human nature that once we take it as it's something, and that's part of the psychology in it. Once I have it, and I know it's mine, it doesn't matter. And we all experience it here. How many of us have visited frequently the Empire State Building or the Statue of Liberty or the things that New York is known for? Personally, I've only been there whenever I've taken somebody visiting New York there. But on my own, I never sit down and say, oh, I'd like to go to the Statue of Liberty tomorrow. Because I know I can go anytime I want. Maybe after the World Trade Center, now I think, just in case it goes away, I should visit. But if you really think about it, that's part of the psychology that's involved. So it's very important that we guard these things because it makes an amazing difference the psychology behind why the Bible tells us not to get into a relationship prior to getting married. Because all these things play a role in our psychology and in how we approach things. And so if we agree that I really should not be into a relationship, a physical relationship with my future spouse until we get married, then the question becomes, to your point, how far is far enough? In other words, many people will make lines and boundaries and say, okay, my boundary, and I remember somebody saying, my boundary is the neck. Anything above the neck is okay, anything below the neck is not okay. And I wondered, okay, how far does it go? And here's the thing, and here's something even worse that sometimes we don't think about. I will not even touch her, or I will not touch him at all. I will be like the perfect gentleman or the perfect lady as far as the relationship is concerned when we're together. But in private, I will not be. That's another damaging thing. If I satisfy myself sexually on my own, that will impact my relationship with my future spouse. And I know some people say, well, wait a minute, you're getting into an area that shouldn't be the case. And I know a lot of us have been programmed, whether we hear it at school or whatever, that it's okay, but it's not okay. It impacts, if I masturbate, it impacts my relationship with my future spouse. When there are men that get with women or women that get with men and they say, I can never have an orgasm. Why? Because they got used to. Now, can you do it on your own? Yes. But when I'm with her or with him, I cannot. Again, it's a problem in the sexual relationship, in the marriage, that was caused because of something outside of the marriage.
So again, what's the boundary?
So getting to that, if I am trying to limit my physical contact with the person only in their presence, and then I go behind closed doors and I self-gratify, that will still hurt the relationship. So therefore, then the question becomes, well, where can I go? Think of it this way. Anything that I do in the presence of that person that will stimulate me sexually will hurt me. Because like I said, it's not just with the person, but it's also the stimulation that happens when I'm away from the person. So that means if we go with the person who told me, and he was telling me in such a self-righteous way that I'm from the neck up. So he can do anything from the neck up, but below that, he has his boundaries. If you think about that, if that stimulates my thought, and it stimulates my sexual gratification later on, then that causes a problem. Personally, I don't like to put a clear cut because I feel this is different for every person, but I can tell you very simply, what is the purpose of what you do? For example, something very simple, holding hands. Can we hold hands or not? If we're going to hold hands because she's going to trip and I'm holding her hand, that's very different than if I'm holding hands and I'm being aroused by holding her hand. That's why I'm saying I don't want to put a specific boundary, because we all have our own boundaries. Some people are hugsy-wugsy and they hug and kiss all the time, and some people are very distant. They will both have different reactions in the relationship to holding hands, for example.
So if holding hands doesn't arouse you, then holding hands is the boundary.
Exactly. What I'm trying to say is I need to set the boundary for myself. I need to set the boundary for myself. And if holding hands does not cause an arousal, then yes. But if holding hands will cause an arousal, so it might be for me, I cannot hold hands. But it might be for you, you say, oh, I can hold hands and I'm okay with that. So I'm trying to make it, but again, we have to be honest with ourselves, because I can say, oh, it doesn't bother me, but I'll think about it later.
I agree with that 100%, but there is another concern other than the person. I think the other concern, and everybody here, not everybody, but a lot of people have experienced that. and things don't just stay at the same level over a long period of time. So if I hold hands now, the next step in a month maybe or 3 weeks from now is going to be something else. And I remember Huna Michael said something
The
long
law
time.
of diminishing returns.
Yeah. so I mean things that's all. Yeah, I remember I'm gonna tell you in 1 minute. I got my cell phone 7 years ago. And 7 years, I remember that very well because I got it the same time with Melody. And at that time,
That was your first phone.
that was my first cell phone. At that time, I was so against having a cell phone. So against it. Why? We always lived our life without a cell phone. What's the big deal now? I lived 40 years, 45 years without a cell phone. Why do I need? And people who knew me at that time know that about me very well. And now, if I'm one day without my phone, I really become very angry and cranky, and because over time you get used to something, you get used to it, and that's the problem with the long dating and commitment and all these things. And over time, things are not gonna stay as it starts. Now I'm holding hand and I'm okay, that's fine. But things are not gonna stay by holding hand. Things are gonna change. And now I'm holding hand, next time I'm gonna do this, and then that, and then that, and then that, and then whatever.
And you're saying
What?
you start
And that's not questionable. That's not questionable.
Actually, let me build on that a little bit.
Now I have a
But I want to think.
Just to clarify, 7 years ago, Sri didn't have a phone, and today he has a smartphone.
Wow! Not just a phone, but a smartphone.
Case closed.
And I never used to text, and now I only text.
I get some myself.
This is so bad.
But both of you are kind of, okay, sorry to say it, but you're kind of contradicting each other. You're saying you can't live without something when you're
Wait,
used to it,
can I-
right? You're saying when it's when you're used to it, when you have it, you don't want it.
Let me clarify.
I think there's an explanation for both. That just use a cell phone example, not the same one, but a cell phone example. That if I get a cell phone because getting a cell phone for me is like a status symbol, right? Then the next time the next time a better cell phone comes out that's going to give me better status, I'm going to get that cell phone and that cell phone, right? So if a cell phone is just a functional thing, then I won't be so I won't be so driven to keep increasing the odds in my cell phone ownership, right? The same thing in the relationship, right? So if holding hands is just something, is just a sign of intimacy, just not physical intimacy, just emotional intimacy. We're close, we hold hands. Then it's not something that I'm doing because it gratifies, like it builds. It's like
Physically aroused,
it's not,
sexually aroused.
yeah, it's not a lustful thing. It's just something that it's a, you see, one thing is a sign, and the other one is like has like a gratification. Do you know what I'm saying? Like one is a sign of a close relationship, but the other one is something that really feeds my desires.
Yeah.
And it's not, yeah.
Let me put it this way. There are two, and I was just mentioning the first one, but there are two things that I need to put in mind to make my own boundary. The first one is what I mentioned, which is what actions create that arousal. And it could be just the simple touch, it could be, different people react differently. But the second one is, and this goes back to the idea of the small foxes that ruin the vineyard. And sometimes it's like, okay, holding hands did not do anything, so now I can go a little bit more. Let's do a little bit of hugging. Well, hugging didn't really do anything, so let me do a little bit of necking or kissing or whatever. And before I know it, it's one thing that gets into another. That's the whole idea of the small foxes. Small foxes are cute, they're tiny, they don't look like they could ruin anything. But the fact is, the small foxes will ruin the vineyard. Think of, for example, if I have a cord, a really tough cord, and I try to break it with my hand, I cannot. But if I take every little thread in the cord and try to break the thread, I can. And little by little, I can go through the entire cord. There are areas in New York over here where you might be at a certain level, and you might drive for a while and it seems like it's level, but after you drive for a while you find you actually drove from a high level, you drove all the way down, and you didn't really feel it, you didn't notice it. I can't tell you how many times when a teenager becomes pregnant, and many times a person that would be the last person you would think that would actually get pregnant. And the question that always comes up, how did I get here? How did I get here? And the reason why she got there is she just left one little boundary or one little thing and said, this is no big deal, this is no big deal, this is fine, this is okay, this is this and that. And before you know it, it's like I've gone from here to there and I don't know how did I get here. And the problem is, if I let myself loose and I go from one thing to another, to another, to another, and I say this doesn't arouse me, this doesn't arouse me, this doesn't arouse me, this doesn't arouse me, I will find I'll go too far, and before you know it, here's the thing also, and I think we've all been there. When we get to a certain level of arousal, we are kind of drunk. We are not aware of what we're doing. And so the reality is, I can say whatever I want to say, but when I get to a certain level, people misbehave. There are people for sexual reasons, they're almost like drugs. They steal, they do all sorts of things. If you think of the criminal act of rape, it's someone with a sexual desire, but has no control, just goes at it no matter what the consequences are. Now, I'm not saying we're going to go out and rape, but the fact is, there are date rapes that we're all aware of. There are many times that I can just simply, just because of my own desire, I start with the hand and I go to this and this and this, and before you know it, we're deep, both mutually agreeing and everything, deep into a physical thing. Even if I didn't have intercourse, but we're deep into a physical thing, and it's like, how did we even get there? It was gradual, little by little. We didn't even feel it. It just happened. That's the thing that Sam is talking about, that we have to really be very careful about, because if we're not careful, I will get there without even realizing. You only realize it, it's kind of like when you drive and you're daydreaming, and before you know it, it's like, oh, I arrived already. How did that happen? That's exactly how it happens. You do not realize the progression that's taking place, because those little foxes are cute, they're nice, they don't seem dangerous, and you let them play around. And before you know it, the vineyard is ruined.
I know we're a few minutes over, but if it's okay with everyone, we'll take just a couple of quick questions, okay? Have your questions and we'll try to respond, 30 to 60 seconds, and just so we can get 2 or 3 more quick questions in, okay? You have, can we just see hands who has questions? Real quick. Maureen has one. Was there another one over here? No? So we've got one last question. All right, go ahead. You get 1.5 questions. Go ahead.
You said, okay, when I see the person and when touch feeling very and but when myself, whatever I do, it depends on is that
Okay, what I mean is, when I'm by myself, if I will think of my future spouse and I'll masturbate, I will try to gratify myself sexually, that will cause problems in the relationship. People who are used to gratify themselves by themselves have a hard time when they are with the other sex together later on. And it happens with men, it happens with women, but even more with men. Men a lot of times will be with a woman sexually, will gratify themselves sexually, and then later on be with a woman and they cannot perform.
That's the same problem with pornography.
Follow up.
Exactly, absolutely.
Okay, I kind of don't agree with what you're saying.
Okay.
Because I think like masturbation is healthy. Because if you're gratifying yourself and you're not able to be gratified in your relationship, isn't that the other person's problem, that they can't gratify you? Like everyone says, you say that you know yourself best, and
Right.
that's why you can gratify yourself. So like, that's the other person's problem, I think.
Here's the thing.
They can't satisfy
With
you.
here's the thing, and this is by the way, this is unfortunate. This has been widespread. Everybody is convinced that oh, I need to, kids and teenagers and everybody needs to masturbate and it's healthy and blah, blah, blah. It is not healthy from a marital point of view because, again, what happens is, and this is even, it's both men and women, but it's even stronger for men, where when men masturbate on their own and then they come in a relationship with a woman, they cannot perform. They cannot perform. I hear it time and time again. When somebody says he cannot perform, the first thing I say, can you do it on your own? And he says, yes, I can. I can reach an orgasm on my own, but I cannot reach an orgasm with my wife. And the reason is because that initial imprint that I talked about, he is used to being satisfied in a certain way. So when the environment changes, he's having a hard time reaching an ejaculation.
So what if the individual, they abstain before marriage, but in marriage they're not sexually satisfied? Well, what's the issue then? Like, why wouldn't the person?
There could be a
There are
lot
medical-
of
there are medical reasons.
there could be a lot of reasons, some medical, some psychological, some simply that let's face it, we're not given a guide, so sometimes whether the guys or the women, they act in a way that messes up the whole thing. And
we need to also recognize, listen, a big part of the reason why people that we hear in our communities are not sexually satisfied in marriage is not physical, it's a mental thing. And what I mean by that is not a mental sickness, but if I'm fighting with my wife all the time, right, and then I want to come and be sexually intimate with her, sex is as much mental as it is physical, as much, if not more mental than it is physical. Okay, I was listening to a sermon one time. They said that the most powerful sexual organ on a woman is her brain. It is, okay. But we have to recognize we think sex is a physical thing. It is physical, it is mental, and it is spiritual. So I think part of the reason it doesn't work a lot of times is because the only part of the focus is the body. That's it, the flesh. Okay? And people don't take into account the other aspects, the other dimensions of sexual, because sex is it's a physical intimacy. So if I'm not emotionally and mentally, spiritually connected with that person, a lot of times they're not drawn to each other and they're not satisfied by one another physically as well. Yeah. So sorry to
no, absolutely, that's right.
I think
And that's the
the-
difference between
that's
sex
the-
and love.
Exactly. That's the slide here up there. There is lust in marriage. When there is no love.
I can still have a lustful relationship with my wife. We think of lust like only if I'm not authorized with that person. So we think of it in that context. But no, I can be in a lustful relationship with my wife because I'm looking at her for my own gratifications. It's not a love relationship. It's not sharing and giving her my entire being and her giving me her entire being. And once we hold back from the entire being, with all the dimensions that I mentioned before, that integrated person, then you cannot have that satisfaction like Abuna was saying. Because it's not just physical. We can have sex, but we might not really be making love.
So does that make it a sin?
Does it make it a sin?
You're saying you get lust at your wife, and that's a sin.
Okay, let me put it to you this way, and I'll leave it to Abuna to correct me afterwards. There are sins of omission and commission. It's not everything we look at is black and white. If I simply am not seeking what's best for my wife, to gratify my wife, that is a sin. Every good thing that I can do that I do not do is a sin. So just because, in other words, I don't want us to look at it like, okay, lust versus love, as much as it's really the fact is, I'm not gratifying my wife. I'm not satisfying my wife. That in and of itself is a problem. Does that make sense? Or okay?
Can I give a slightly different switch?
Sure.
Because I think we oftentimes look for the least common denominator. Like, is it okay? Like, is it a sin? And I think what I meant is giving to us is a higher calling. He's talking about the holiness and the sacredness and the beauty of sexual intimacy and of making love. And I think the problem is, over time, if it's just about lust, we cease to see its value. And we cease to see sex for what it is. So I don't even want to say, is it a sin, is it not a sin, where's the line? I think what we should, as Christians, should be aiming for, and guys, we have to be honest with ourselves, we're not there. You know, the vast majority of us are not there when it comes to our view of sex. We're not, okay? And a big part of the reason is because of the culture that we were raised in Egypt, and here, and the media, and everything that's around us is bombarded with it. So we're not there, but I think we have something to aim for, okay? So if I'm saying right now, I see sex as a thing that satisfies my lustful desires, okay, that's where I'm at. But I want to get here, okay? And if I get here, sex is going to be so much better. It's going to be so much greater than what we limit it to be. Because it ceases just to be about a physical act, and it becomes this holistic, it becomes a spiritual thing that we sometimes, I said to a guy one time, I'm like, pray with your wife before you have sex. And the guy almost like, I was going to rip my up, he was going to like defraud, lay aside me, okay? He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, let me tell you something, Jesus closes his eyes when you're having sex. He doesn't see it, okay? Dirty! Never seen that stuff, even though he commanded it, all right? So I think we have to be fair and say, right now we're here, and we need to get here. And when we get here, it's going to be so much better. Our marriages will be so much healthier too, when we have a more balanced, pure, sacramental view of sexual intimacy. Because it is sacramental, guys. There is something that's happening that we don't see through a seen act. Okay? We think of sacraments as the seven. But I want to tell you guys, sex is mystical, it is sacramental, it is sacred. And that makes the marriage bed an altar, of holiness. It's fantastic.
It's where the two become one. As a matter of fact, in a lot of cultures, they consider that the marriage is consummated by the physical relationship, by making love. So it's a very holy, like when I had a similar experience where I mentioned to somebody about praying, and I would say one of the things that you can think about is if you pray together, think of it, now that I prayed with that person, that my future spouse, can I really do something? And if you feel whatever you're about to do, put that as a third way of measuring how far can I go. If I feel awkward now because I just prayed, that's a sign. Because when you do get married, you should be able to pray together before the act, and you even enjoy it more. It's a fulfillment that, like Abuna said, it's really something that when there's something wrong with the marriage, a lot of times it has to do with they're not getting fulfilled sexually as well.
This is good stuff. Thank you, Emad. Guys, I'm just gonna hear me out the right way. I was gonna say we could talk about sex all day and people would not get bored of this, but I'm talking about in this kind of a good context where we get the right view of sex, not some other conversations that take place at God knows where. But Emad, thank you, because I think we need to have a more biblical Christian view of our sexuality. So thank you very much.
Absolutely.